Jasmine Carter never imagined she'd end up farming. Growing up in Atlanta, she was more comfortable with computers than cattle, more familiar with city streets than country roads. But after 12 years serving in the Navy, working in intelligence and seeing parts of the world most people only read about, she wanted something different, something peaceful, something that was truly hers. The farm she bought sat on 50 acres of rolling Georgia land, about 2 hours south of where she grew up. The previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Patterson, had let the place run down over his final years. The fences needed repair, the barn needed paint, and the fields had gone wild with weeds. But when Jasmine first drove up that long dirt driveway and saw the sun setting over those hills, she knew she was home. She paid for it with every penny she'd saved during her military service. Her father thought she was crazy. He'd served in the Army back in his day, and warned her that rural Georgia might not be ready for a black woman running her own farm. But Jasmine had faced bigger challenges than suspicious neighbors. She'd earned her place in rooms where women weren't always welcome. She'd proven herself in situations where people doubted her before she even opened her mouth. A farm? She could handle a farm. The first few months were hard work, the kind that made her muscles ache in ways even military training hadn't. She woke up before sunrise every morning, pulled on her work boots, and headed out to fix fences, clear fields, and learn everything she could about sustainable farming. YouTube became her teacher for things the Navy never covered, like how to treat a sick chicken or when to plant tomatoes. She started small. A vegetable garden first, then some chickens for eggs. She bought 3 goats that she named after her favorite childhood cartoon characters, even though she'd never admit that to anyone. They were troublemakers, always escaping their pen, but they made her laugh. That first summer, she sold produce at the local farmer's market, and the look on people's faces when they tasted her tomatoes made all the early mornings worth it. Some of her neighbors were kind. Mrs. Chen, who ran the small grocery store in town, always had a smile for her and gave her tips about which local restaurants might buy her vegetables. Old man Foster, who lived 3 farms down, stopped by one day with a basket of his wife's biscuits and some advice about the best feed for chickens. These small kindnesses reminded her that good people existed everywhere, even in places where she might not expect to find them. But there were others. The ones who stared too long at the feed store. The ones who stopped talking when she walked into the local diner. The ones who seemed personally offended that she existed in their space. At first, she told herself she was imagining things, being too sensitive. But deep down, she knew what she was seeing. She'd seen it before in different forms, in different places. The hardware store owner, a thick man named Dale Hutchins, never quite looked at her when she shopped there. He'd toss her change on the counter instead of placing it in her hand. His answers to her questions came in grunts and single words. His teenage son would snicker with his friends when she walked past. Small things, dismissible things, things that individually meant nothing but together painted a clear picture. Still, Jasmine pushed forward. She wasn't going to let anyone's attitude stop her from building the life she wanted. By fall, she had regular customers at the farmer's market. Her eggs were selling out every weekend. She'd started planning for spring crops and thinking about maybe getting a cow or 2. Life was starting to feel like what she'd hoped for when she left the military. That's when the small problems started. Nothing she could quite put her finger on at first. A section of fence knocked down, which she figured might have been deer or her escape artist goats. Some seedlings in her garden trampled, which could have been raccoons. Her mailbox got knocked over one night, which happened sometimes on country roads. But then it happened again. And again, different sections of fence. More seedlings destroyed. These ones in neat rows like someone had walked through them deliberately. Her mailbox wasn't just knocked over the second time. Someone had taken a bat to it, leaving it completely destroyed. Jasmine started keeping her grandfather's old shotgun closer. Not that she expected to need it. She'd qualified expert marksman in the Navy, but she'd never actually wanted to point a weapon at another person outside of training. The gun was just for peace of mind, for those late nights when she heard strange sounds outside and remembered she was miles from the nearest neighbor. She called the local sheriff's office after finding her garden, destroyed for the 3rd time. The deputy who showed up was young, probably fresh out of the academy. He walked through her garden, took some notes, and basically told her that rural life came with these kinds of problems. Could have been kids, he said. Could have been animals. Not much they could do without evidence. He suggested she get some motion sensor lights and maybe a dog. Jasmine bit back the frustration rising in her throat. She'd documented everything, taken photos, kept records. But she could see in his eyes that he'd already decided this wasn't worth his time. Or maybe he'd decided she wasn't worth his time. There was a difference, and she knew which one this was. That night, she called her best friend from the service, a guy named Troy who'd gone through intelligence training with her. He listened while she vented about the deputy's dismissive attitude and the increasingly obvious vandalism. Troy had always been protective of her, like an older brother even though they were the same age. He offered to come down for a visit, maybe help her set up some security cameras. She told him not to worry yet. She could handle this. But as October turned to November and the nights got colder, Jasmine found herself wondering if she'd made a mistake. Not about the farm itself. She loved the farm, loved the work, loved watching things grow under her care. But maybe her father had been right about the people. Maybe some places weren't ready for change. No matter how much time passed or how many laws got written, she'd lie in bed at night, listening to the sounds of the countryside, crickets and frogs, the distant hoot of an owl, wind rustling through the trees, and wonder if that creak on the porch was just the house settling or something else. Someone else. She hated feeling afraid in her own home. She'd faced actual dangers in her military career, real threats in real places, and never felt as unsettled as she did hearing footsteps that might or might not be there. Still, every morning she got up, pulled on those work boots, and walked out to face another day. That's what you did when you built something. You showed up. You kept going. You didn't let fear or doubt or suspicious neighbors stop you from living your life. Jasmine Carter hadn't survived Navy training, hadn't earned her rank and her honors, hadn't saved up for 12 years to buy this farm, just to run away at the first sign of trouble. What she didn't know, as she fell asleep that November night with the shotgun leaning against her bedroom wall, was that the trouble had barely started. And it was about to get much, much worse. The first letter appeared in her mailbox on a Tuesday morning in late November. Jasmine had walked down her driveway like she did every day to check for mail, thinking about nothing more serious than whether her seed catalog order had arrived. Instead, she found a plain white envelope with no stamp, no return address, just her name written in angry, scratchy handwriting. She knew before opening it that this wasn't going to be good news. Normal mail came through the postal service. This had been hand-delivered, which meant someone had driven onto her property, walked to her mailbox, and left this for her to find. Her hand shook slightly as she tore it open. The words inside were ugly. Racial slurs she hadn't heard since she was a kid. Threats about what happens to people who don't know their place. A warning that this land belonged to real Americans, and she needed to leave before something bad happened. No signature, naturally. Cowards never sign their threats. Jasmine stood there in her driveway staring at those hateful words and felt something shift inside her. Up until now, she could tell herself the vandalism might be random, might be kids being stupid, might be anything other than what she suspected. But this letter removed all doubt. Someone wanted her gone. Someone hated her enough to write these words and drive to her property to deliver them. She took photos of the letter and called the sheriff's office again. Same young deputy showed up, same dismissive attitude. He looked at the letter, asked if she had any enemies, suggested it might be a prank. When Jasmine pointed out the connection to all the previous vandalism, he just shrugged and said he'd file a report. She could tell by his tone that the report would go straight into a filing cabinet and never be looked at again. That night, around 2 a.m, Jasmine woke to the sound of vehicles on her property. She grabbed her grandfather's shotgun and looked out her bedroom window to see 3 trucks circling her house, their headlights blazing into every window like searchlights. They drove in circles around her house and barn for maybe 5 minutes, engines revving, music blasting. Then they disappeared down her driveway, leaving nothing but dust and the pounding of her heart in her chest. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat in her living room with all the lights off, shotgun across her lap, watching the darkness outside and wondering when they'd come back. Because they would come back. She knew that much. This was escalation. This was intimidation. And it was working. The next morning, exhausted and angry, she found her truck tires slashed. All 4 of them. In the barn, someone had poured something into the gas tank of her tractor. She checked and found sugar, which would destroy the engine if she tried to run it. They'd done their homework. They knew exactly how to hurt her without leaving obvious evidence of who did it. The repair costs were one thing, but the message was clear. They could get to her any time. They could destroy her livelihood piece by piece, and apparently nobody was going to stop them. Jasmine started researching security systems. She ordered cameras online, the kind that connected to her phone and recorded everything. She installed motion sensor lights around her house and barn. She varied her routines, never walking out at the same time each day, always checking her surroundings before leaving the house. These were precautions she'd learned in the military, habits she never thought she'd need to use back home in Georgia. Troy called her every few days, increasingly worried about what he was hearing. He wanted to drive down from North Carolina where he lived now, but Jasmine kept telling him to wait. She was handling it. She had security measures in place. She wasn't going to be driven off her land by some cowards who hid in the dark, but the harassment didn't stop. It got worse. Someone killed 3 of her chickens and left them arranged on her porch in a pattern. She cleaned it up before she could think too hard about what kind of person does something like that. Her garden, which she'd worked so hard to establish, got sprayed with something that killed every plant. Weeks of work destroyed in a single night. The letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. They started mentioning specific details about her daily routine, about when she went to town, about when she was alone on the property. They wanted her to know they were watching. They wanted her to feel hunted. Through her new security cameras, Jasmine started to see patterns, the same trucks appearing at odd hours. They'd drive slowly past her property entrance, sometimes stopping for a few minutes before moving on. She recorded everything, documented every incident, but she knew the sheriff's office wasn't going to help. That had become crystal clear. One night at the local feed store, she overheard some men talking. They didn't know she was in the next aisle, or maybe they didn't care. They were discussing someone they called the outsider, who'd bought the Patterson place, talking about how the land should have stayed in local hands, how it wasn't right that someone like her owned good Georgia farmland. One of them mentioned a group they were part of, something called the Heritage Protectors, said they were going to handle the situation soon. Jasmine's blood ran cold. This wasn't just random harassment. This was organized. There was a group of them and they had a name and they were planning something. She recorded the conversation on her phone, or at least what she could hear of it. When she turned the corner with her feed bags, the men stopped talking and stared at her. One of them smiled, not friendly. He knew she'd heard them and he wanted her to know he didn't care. She recognized him. Dale Hutchins, the hardware store owner, the one who never looked at her directly, who made her feel unwelcome every time she shopped there. Apparently, he wasn't content with just being rude anymore. December brought cold weather and more trouble. Jasmine's barn was broken into, and someone had destroyed what was left of her equipment, smashing tools and overturning feed barrels. They'd spray-painted words on the walls, the same slurs from the letters. At least now she had it all on camera, clear footage of 2 men in masks doing the damage. She took the footage to the sheriff's office herself this time, demanded to speak to the actual sheriff instead of his deputies. Sheriff Mitchell was an older man, probably in his 60s, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much small-town politics. He watched her footage, listened to her story, and told her what she'd already suspected he'd say. "The men are wearing masks," he said. "Can't identify them from this. And technically they're on your property, but they haven't threatened you directly. It's vandalism, which is a misdemeanor. We'll keep the report on file." Jasmine felt her frustration boiling over. "They've been terrorizing me for months. They've destroyed my property, killed my animals, sent me threatening letters. What exactly do they have to do before you'll actually investigate?" Sheriff Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "Miss Carter, I understand you're upset. But this is a small community. People don't take kindly to accusations without solid proof. Now, I'm not saying these incidents didn't happen. I'm just saying we need more to go on before we start pointing fingers at specific individuals." She wanted to scream that she'd heard them planning at the feed store, that she knew exactly who was behind this, but she could see in his face that it wouldn't matter. He'd already decided what kind of case this was, or more likely, what kind of person she was. Someone causing trouble in his quiet county. Someone who didn't fit in and was probably imagining half of what she claimed happened. Walking out of that sheriff's office, Jasmine made a decision. She called Troy, and this time when he offered to come help, she said yes. But she didn't just want Troy, she wanted the others too. The team they'd served with. The people she trusted with her life. She explained everything that had been happening, including the conversation she'd overheard about the heritage protectors. Troy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We're coming, all of us. Give me a week to make arrangements." "I don't want to put anyone in danger," Jasmine said. Troy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jasmine, we trained for actual combat situations. We've been in real danger. Some local wannabe militia group doesn't scare us. Besides, your family. You stood with us. Now we stand with you." That conversation gave her hope for the first time in weeks. She wasn't alone in this. She had people who understood what she was facing, who wouldn't dismiss her concerns or tell her she was overreacting. People who knew how to handle situations like this, but she didn't have a week. 3 nights later, her barn caught fire. Jasmine smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. She ran out in her pajamas and boots, trying desperately to get her animals out. The goats were screaming, her remaining chickens were in panic. She managed to save most of them, leading them away from the burning structure while calling 911 on her cell phone. The fire department arrived too late to save the barn. They managed to keep it from spreading to her house, but the barn was a total loss. Everything inside, all her equipment, all her stored feed and supplies gone. Thousands of dollars of damage. Maybe tens of thousands. The fire marshal came out the next day, walked through the wreckage, and ruled it accidental. "Probably faulty wiring in the old barn," he said. "These things happened in old structures." Jasmine showed him her security footage from that night, showing 2 figures near the barn about an hour before the fire started. The footage was grainy in the dark, but you could clearly see them moving around the building. The fire marshal shrugged. "Could be anyone. Could be kids. And we found evidence of electrical failure. That's what started it." Jasmine didn't bother arguing. She knew what this was. She'd known from the moment she smelled that smoke. They'd escalated from vandalism and threats to actual arson, to trying to destroy everything she'd built. And still nobody in authority was going to help her. That night she sat on her porch with her shotgun and her phone and looked at what remained of her barn. The smell of smoke still hung in the air. Her animals were traumatized. Her farm was in ruins. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed about was being systematically destroyed by people who thought their hatred gave them the right. She thought about giving up. She really did. Maybe this wasn't worth it. Maybe she should just sell the property and leave. Find somewhere else to start over. Somewhere people didn't care what color her skin was or whether she belonged. But then she thought about her grandfather, who'd fought in World War II only to come home to a country that didn't want to give him the same rights he'd fought to defend. She thought about her father, who'd served in the army during Vietnam and faced his own share of hatred. She thought about her time in the Navy, about the oath she'd sworn to defend her country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. These heritage protectors, whatever they called themselves, they were domestic enemies. They were terrorists, pure and simple, using fear and violence to try to drive her away. And Jasmine Carter had spent 12 years learning how to deal with threats. She wasn't leaving. Not now, not ever. This was her land, her farm, her home. And if they wanted it, they were going to have to go through her to get it. She just hoped her team arrived before these cowards worked up the courage to do more than hide in the dark and destroy property. Because Jasmine had a feeling the worst was still coming. 3 weeks after the barn fire, on a cold January afternoon, Jasmine was out in her field trying to salvage what she could of her winter crops. The insurance company was dragging their feet on the barn claim, surprise, surprise. Meanwhile, she was working with borrowed equipment and running through her savings faster than she'd ever imagined possible. Troy and the others were supposed to arrive in 2 days. She'd been counting down to their arrival like a kid waiting for Christmas. Just 2 more days of being alone out here, watching her back, jumping at every sound. 2 more days and she'd have backup. She should have known that 2 days was too long to wait. Around 3 in the afternoon, Jasmine heard vehicles coming up her driveway. At first, she thought maybe it was a delivery, though she wasn't expecting anything. Then she saw them. 5 pickup trucks moving in formation like they'd practiced this. They spread out across her property, blocking the driveway exit, blocking her escape route. Her heart started hammering in her chest. She was 100 yards from her house, from her grandfather's shotgun. She had her cell phone in her pocket. That was it. That was all she had. 8 men climbed out of those trucks. They were dressed in tactical gear, wearing vests and boots like they were soldiers, but Jasmine could tell the difference. She'd served with real soldiers. These were men playing dress-up, trying to look intimidating. And it was working, because every single one of them was carrying a weapon. Rifles, handguns. One guy had a shotgun slung over his shoulder. They weren't even trying to hide what they were doing. This was a show of force. This was meant to terrify her. Dale Hutchins stepped forward from the group. She recognized him immediately, even though he was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap with some kind of flag patch on it. He was the leader here, that much was obvious. The others looked to him, waited for him to speak. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "We need to have a conversation about your situation here." Jasmine's mind was racing. She was outnumbered 8-1. They were armed and she wasn't. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Even if someone heard gunshots, even if someone called for help, it would take the sheriff's department 20 minutes to get here. 20 minutes was a lifetime in a situation like this, but she'd been in tight situations before. Different situations, sure, but the same principle applied. Never show fear. Never let them see you panic. Keep your head clear and look for opportunities. She straightened up from where she'd been working, brushed the dirt off her hands, and walked slowly toward them. Not too fast, nothing that could be seen as aggressive. Just steady, calm, like she dealt with armed men on her property every day. "This is private property," she said when she got close enough for normal conversation. "You're trespassing." "All of you," Dale smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "See, that's what we came to talk about. This property situation, because my grandfather used to own the land adjacent to this place. When old Patterson decided to sell, my family should have had first right of refusal. Instead, he sold to you." "That's not how property sales work," Jasmine said. "He could sell to whoever he wanted. And he sold to me. It's legal. It's done." One of the other men, younger than Dale, with a scraggly beard and hate in his eyes, stepped forward. "It ain't right, though. This land belongs with people who belong here, people whose families built this community, not some outsider who shows up with military money and thinks she can just take over." Jasmine noticed how they'd positioned themselves. They'd fanned out in a semicircle around her. Some had their hands on their weapons. Some were holding them ready. This was coordinated. They'd planned this. Her hand moved slowly to her pocket, feeling for her phone. She needed to call for help, needed to alert someone to what was happening. But she had to be careful. Any sudden movement might provoke them. "What exactly do you want?" she asked Dale, keeping her voice steady. Dale pulled a folded paper from his vest. "We want you to sign this. It's a quick sale agreement. You sell the property to our organization for a fair price, and you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere more suitable for you. Everyone wins. What's the price?" Jasmine asked, even though she knew this wasn't really about money. $50,000. She almost laughed. She'd paid 4 times that for the property, and that was before all the improvements she'd made. $50,000 wouldn't even cover her mortgage. This wasn't a sale offer. This was theft with paperwork. "No," she said simply. Dale's smile disappeared. "You should think carefully about your answer, Miss Carter. We're trying to do this the nice way, the legal way. But there are other ways this could go." The men around him shifted, weapons moving slightly. The threat was clear. Sign the paper or face the consequences. Jasmine's mind flashed back to her training. Assess the threat. Count the weapons. Look for cover. Her house was too far. The burned remnants of her barn offered nothing. There were some trees at the edge of the property, but she'd never make it there. She was in the open, exposed, outgunned. If this went bad, she was going to die on her own land. But she was also thinking about her phone. Most of her team didn't know it, but she'd set up an emergency alert system after the barn fire. One button push and it would send her location and an SOS to Troy, to her father, to 3 other members of her old unit. Just one button push. "I need time to think about this," she said, sliding her hand into her pocket slowly. "You got 15 minutes, Dale said. "We'll wait right here. You go on to your house, read over the paperwork, make the smart choice. 15 minutes, then we come get your answer." Jasmine nodded and started to turn toward her house. Her finger found the emergency button on her phone through the fabric of her pocket. She pressed it, held it for 3 seconds like she'd programmed it. The phone vibrated once to confirm. The alert was sent. Now she just had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. If help could arrive in time. She walked toward her house, feeling their eyes on her back, feeling the weight of their weapons pointed in her direction. Every step felt like it might be her last. But she kept walking, kept her pace steady, kept her head up. When she reached her front porch, she looked back. They hadn't moved. They were standing there in her field, waiting. Some of them were smoking. Some were talking quietly among themselves. They looked relaxed, confident. They thought they'd already won. Jasmine went inside and grabbed her grandfather's shotgun. She checked it, made sure it was loaded. 1 shotgun against 8 men with rifles. The math wasn't good, but it was better than nothing. She pulled out her phone and saw the confirmation. Alert sent to 5 contacts. No responses yet. No indication anyone had received it. She tried calling Troy directly. No answer. She tried calling 911. The call went through and she quickly explained the situation to the dispatcher. Armed men on her property threatening her, weapons visible. The dispatcher said they were sending someone, but Jasmine could hear the doubt in the woman's voice. How many times had she called with complaints that went nowhere? 15 minutes. That's what Dale had said. Jasmine checked her watch and started counting. She moved through her house, checking windows, looking for the best defensive position. If they came for her, if this turned into what she feared it might turn into, she wanted every advantage she could get. She pulled furniture to create cover, positioned herself where she could see the front approach. 10 minutes passed. No response on her phone. No sound of sirens. No help coming. Outside, she could see the men gathering again. They'd stopped their casual conversation. They were looking toward her house. Dale was checking his watch. 5 minutes left. Jasmine's hands were sweating on the shotgun. She'd trained for combat situations, but this was different. This was her home, her land. These were Americans, fellow citizens, even if they were criminals. She'd never fired a weapon at another person. She'd never wanted to. Even now, with everything they'd done to her, everything they were threatening, she didn't want it to come to violence. But she would defend herself if she had to. She'd sworn an oath to defend her country, and that oath didn't end just because she'd left the service. These men were terrorists, pure and simple. They were using violence and threats to try to take what wasn't theirs. And Jasmine Carter wasn't going to let that happen. The 15 minutes were up. Dale and his men started walking toward her house. They weren't hurrying. They had all the time in the world. They had all the weapons. They had all the power. Or so they thought. Jasmine positioned herself at a window, shotgun ready. She called out through the glass, "That's close enough. You need to leave my property now." Dale kept coming. "We need your answer, Miss Carter." "Did you make the smart choice?" "My answer is no. This is my property. It's staying my property. And you need to leave before someone gets hurt." One of the younger men raised his rifle, not quite pointing it at her but making the threat obvious. "Seems to me you're the only one who might get hurt here." Dale held up his hand, stopping the others. "Last chance, Miss Carter. Sign the paper, take the money, walk away. Or we'll make sure you can't stay here anyway. Maybe the next fire won't be just your barn. Maybe it'll be your house with you inside it." There it was. The direct threat. The admission of what they'd done to her barn. All on record now because Jasmine had been recording this whole encounter on her phone since the moment they arrived. "You just confessed to arson," Jasmine said. "I've got it all recorded. You think burning down my house is going to make this situation better for you?" Dale's face darkened. "No one's going to believe you're recording. No one's going to help you. Don't you get that yet? We run this county. We decide who belongs and who doesn't. And you don't belong." He started reaching for something at his hip. Jasmine saw the movement and raised her shotgun, aiming through the window. "Don't," she said. "Just don't." The other men raised their weapons now, no longer pretending to be peaceful. This was it. This was the moment where everything could go wrong, where people could die, where her dream of a peaceful farm life could end in blood and violence. Jasmine's finger rested on the trigger. Her heart was pounding. Her breath was steady despite her fear. She'd trained for this. She was ready. She didn't want this, but she was ready. Then she heard it. The sound of vehicles approaching, fast. Multiple vehicles. Dale heard it too. He and his men turned, looking back toward the road. Jasmine couldn't see from her position, but she could hear them clearly now. Several vehicles moving with purpose, not slowing down at the property entrance. The vehicles came into view. 4 unmarked SUVs, dark-colored with tinted windows. They drove onto her property and positioned themselves in a way that immediately changed the tactical situation. Whoever was in those vehicles knew what they were doing. The doors opened. Men stepped out. 12 of them, and Jasmine recognized every single face. Troy was there, and Commander James Peterson and Chen and Rodriguez and 8 others from her old unit. Her Navy SEAL team, the people she'd served with, fought alongside, trusted with her life, and every single one of them was armed. The Heritage Protectors suddenly didn't look so confident anymore. Dale's face had gone pale. His men were looking around nervously, realizing their numerical advantage had just disappeared. Commander Peterson stepped forward. He was in his 50s now, gray at the temples, but he still moved like the warrior he'd always been. He raised a megaphone to his lips. "Attention. My name is Commander James Peterson, United States Navy, retired. The 12 men with me are also retired Navy SEALs. We have witnessed you threatening our teammate with weapons on our own property. We have recorded everything. We have contacted the FBI field office in Atlanta. They are en route to this location right now. I strongly suggest you put down your weapons and wait for their arrival." Dale tried to bluster. "This is none of your concern. This is a local property dispute." "Wrong," Peterson said. "This is domestic terrorism. This is a hate crime. This is armed intimidation, and we've got it all on record." Jasmine stepped out onto her porch now, still holding her shotgun but feeling safer than she'd felt in months. Her team was here. Her family was here. She wasn't alone anymore. Troy looked up at her and grinned. "Took us a bit to get here. Had to stop for gas." Despite everything, despite the fear and tension, Jasmine found herself smiling. These were her people. And together, they'd just changed everything. The look on Dale Hutchins' face was something Jasmine would remember for the rest of her life. It was the exact moment when a bully realizes he's not the toughest person in the room anymore. When someone who's been pushing others around suddenly has to face people who actually know how to fight back. Commander Peterson didn't move from his position, but 4 of the SEALs had already begun spreading out in a tactical formation that was so smooth and professional it looked choreographed. Which in a way it was. These men had trained together for years. They'd been in real combat situations where hesitation meant death. A bunch of weekend warriors playing dress-up with tactical gear didn't intimidate them at all. "I said put down your weapons," Peterson repeated, his voice calm but carrying that tone of absolute authority that made people obey without thinking. "Do it now." One of the younger men in Dale's group, the one with the scraggly beard, made the mistake of raising his rifle slightly. Before Jasmine could even process what was happening, Chen had moved. In 3 seconds flat, he'd crossed the distance, disarmed the kid, and had him on the ground with his face in the dirt. The rifle was in Chen's hands before anyone else could react. "Anyone else want to make a stupid move?" Chen asked, his voice friendly but his eyes cold. "Because I've been sitting behind a desk for 6 months and I could use the exercise." The other Heritage Protectors started lowering their weapons. Slowly at first, then faster as they realized exactly how badly they'd miscalculated this situation. Rodriguez moved forward with zip ties, the kind police use. Within minutes, all 8 men were secured, their weapons collected and laid out in a neat line on the ground. Dale tried one more time to take control of the situation. "You can't do this. You have no authority here. You're just civilians now." Peterson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're right. We are civilians. Just like Jasmine here is a civilian. Just like you're a civilian. The difference is, we're civilians who witnessed you committing multiple felonies, armed intimidation, terroristic threats, conspiracy. And we're also civilians who recorded every word you said, including your confession to arson." "That won't hold up in court," Dale said, but his voice was weaker now. Troy walked over to him. "Maybe, maybe not. But you know what will definitely hold up? The fact that the FBI's Civil Rights Division is going to be very interested in your little Heritage Protectors group. See, we did some research while we were driving down here. You boys have been busy. 3 other families run off their property in the last 2 years. All minorities, all with similar patterns of harassment. The feds love patterns like that." Jasmine came down from her porch still holding her shotgun, but feeling like she could breathe for the first time in months. She walked over to where Dale sat on the ground, hands secured behind his back, and looked down at him. "You thought I was alone," she said quietly. "You thought because I'm a black woman on a farm in rural Georgia, nobody would care what happened to me. You thought you could terrorize me into giving up everything I'd worked for. And you know what the really sad part is? You might have been right if I'd actually been alone. Your sheriff wasn't going to help me. Your fire marshal ruled my barn fire an accident. Your whole system was set up to let you get away with it. Dale glared up at her but said nothing. But I wasn't alone, Jasmine continued. I had brothers and sisters who served with me, who had my back then and have my back now. You forgot that some of us have families that run deeper than blood and geography. Some of us have families built on trust and honor and shared sacrifice, and those families don't abandon their own. The sound of more vehicles approaching made everyone turn. This time it was marked cars, FBI in their distinctive black SUVs with government plates. Behind them came local sheriff vehicles, and Jasmine recognized Sheriff Mitchell in one of them. The FBI agents who stepped out were all business. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of competence, walked straight to Peterson. Commander Peterson? We spoke on the phone. Special Agent Williams, Atlanta field office. They shook hands. Peterson gestured to the secured men on the ground. These are the individuals we discussed. We have video evidence of armed intimidation, terroristic threats, and a confession to arson. We also have documentation of months of harassment, vandalism, and hate crime activities. Agent Williams looked at Jasmine. Miss Carter, are you all right? Jasmine nodded. I am now. Sheriff Mitchell approached, and Jasmine could see the discomfort on his face. He'd ignored her complaints for months. He'd dismissed her evidence. And now federal agents were on his turf because local law enforcement had failed to do their job. Special Agent Williams, he started. I'm Sheriff Mitchell. This is my jurisdiction, and I'm not sure why. I'm aware this is your jurisdiction, Sheriff, Williams interrupted, her tone making it clear she wasn't interested in territorial disputes. I'm also aware that Miss Carter filed multiple complaints with your office about ongoing harassment and threats, all of which appear to have been ignored or inadequately investigated. We'll be reviewing those files as part of our investigation into civil rights violations. The sheriff's face went red, but he knew better than to argue with federal agents. He stepped back and let them work. The FBI processed the scene with professional efficiency. They photographed everything. They took statements from Jasmine and from each member of the SEAL team. They collected the weapons that had been used to threaten her. They read each of the heritage protectors their rights and loaded them into vehicles for transport to federal holding facilities. Dale Hutchins, being loaded into the back of an FBI vehicle, made one last attempt at defiance. This is harassment. This is government overreach. We're patriots defending our heritage. Agent Williams looked at him with something like pity. Mr. Hutchins, I've been investigating domestic terrorist groups for 15 years. I've heard every excuse, every justification, every twisted logic you people come up with to explain why you think it's acceptable to terrorize your neighbors. You know what I've never heard? An actual good reason, because there isn't one. She closed the door on him and turned to her team. Let's process these suspects and start the investigation into their organization. I want to know everyone who's involved. Everyone who knew what they were doing and everyone who looked the other way. As the FBI vehicles pulled away with their prisoners, Jasmine found herself surrounded by her team. These men who'd dropped everything to drive hundreds of miles because she'd hit a panic button. These warriors who'd faced actual combat and still thought her farm in Georgia was worth protecting. Rodriguez, who'd always been the joker of the group, grinned at her. So this is the famous farm we've been hearing about? Looks nice. Little burned barn situation going on, but we can work with that. Jasmine laughed, and it felt good. It felt like releasing months of tension all at once. The barn was actually pretty nice before they torched it. We'll build you a better one, Commander Peterson said. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact. We've got 2 weeks. That's enough time to put up a basic structure and get you operational again. I can't ask you to do that, Jasmine protested. Troy put his arm around her shoulders. You're not asking. We're volunteering. That's what families do. Besides, you think we drove all the way down here just to play hero for one afternoon? We brought tools. We brought skills. We brought bad attitudes and too much coffee. We're building you a barn. Chen nodded toward the burned remnants. That old one looked pretty traditional. We thinking traditional style or something more modern? And just like that, they were making plans. Discussing lumber and electrical wiring and whether they should add a loft. Standing on her property, these retired warriors talking about barn construction like it was just another mission to plan and execute. Agent Williams came over before she left. Miss Carter, I want you to know we're taking this case very seriously. We'll be investigating the Heritage Protectors as a domestic terrorist organization. Everyone involved will face federal charges, and we'll be looking into why local law enforcement failed to respond appropriately to your complaints. Will it stick? Jasmine asked. The charges, I mean. They've got connections in this community. Federal court is different from local court, Williams said, and based on what we've seen today, including that recorded confession to arson, I'd say our case is very strong. These men are going to prison, Miss Carter. I can't promise specific sentences, but I can promise justice. After the FBI left, after Sheriff Mitchell slunk away looking like he'd swallowed something sour, after the scene had been fully processed and cleared, Jasmine and her team stood in a circle on her property. The sun was setting, painting the Georgia sky in shades of orange and red. Thank you, Jasmine said, and her voice broke slightly. I don't know how to thank you enough. You saved my life today. Peterson shook his head. You saved your own life. You held them off. You got evidence. You hit your panic button at the right time. We just provided backup. That's what a team does. Still, Jasmine insisted, you came. When I needed help, you came. Of course we came, Troy said. Did you really think we wouldn't? Jasmine realized she'd never doubted they would. From the moment she'd sent that alert, she'd known they were coming. It was just a matter of whether they'd arrive in time. And they had, because that's who they were. That's what they did. That night they set up camp on her property. Someone had brought tents. Someone else had brought a portable grill, and Chen produced enough steaks to feed a platoon. They built a fire and cooked food and told stories about the old days, about training exercises and missions and all the times they'd had each other's backs. Rodriguez raised a beer. To Jasmine, who bought a farm and got way more excitement than she bargained for, to Jasmine, they all echoed. And to the heritage protectors, Chen added, who learned the hard way that you don't mess with a Navy veteran's family. They drank to that too. Later, as the fire burned down and people started heading to their tents, Troy sat with Jasmine under the stars. You doing okay? He asked. I'm doing better than okay, Jasmine said. For months I've been scared, alone, wondering if I made a mistake buying this place. But today, when I saw you all drive up, when I realized my team was here, I remembered who I am. I remembered that I've faced worse things than some local bullies. And I remembered that I'm not alone. I never was, Troy nodded. You know we're not leaving until that barn is rebuilt, right? Peterson wasn't kidding. We're here for 2 weeks. We're building you the best damn barn in Georgia. And we're going to make sure everyone in this county knows that if they mess with you, they mess with all of us. I don't want to be a burden, Jasmine started, but Troy cut her off. You're not a burden. You're family, and family takes care of each other. Period. End of discussion. Jasmine looked around at the tents scattered across her property, at these men who'd served their country and were now serving her. She looked at her house still standing, at her fields still hers, at her land, the land she'd bought with her own money and defended with her own courage. Tomorrow, the FBI would begin their investigation. The heritage protectors would face federal charges. The local community would have to reckon with what had been done in their name. And her team would start building her a new barn, better than the old one, stronger than before. But tonight, surrounded by her brothers in arms, with the Georgia stars overhead and the smell of wood smoke in the air, Jasmine Carter felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt safe. She felt strong. And she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The sound of hammers and power tools became the new soundtrack of Jasmine's mornings. For 2 weeks, her property buzzed with activity as 12 retired Navy SEALs worked on building her a barn that would make the old one look like a shed. They'd driven into town that first morning, walked into the local lumber yard and placed an order so large the owner's eyes went wide. Word spread fast in a small town. The Navy SEALs were in town. They were camping on the Carter property. They were building her a barn. And anyone with half a brain understood what that meant. Jasmine Carter wasn't alone, and she wasn't going anywhere. The lumberyard owner, a quiet man named Frank who'd always been polite but distant, surprised Jasmine by offering her a 20% discount. Those men served our country, he said simply. Least I can do is make sure they have good materials to work with. It was a small gesture, but it felt like something bigger, like maybe the community was starting to shift, starting to realize that what had happened to her was wrong. The FBI investigation moved forward quickly. Agent Williams stopped by the farm several times over those 2 weeks, updating Jasmine on the progress. They'd raided Dale Hutchins' property and found a disturbing amount of evidence. Documents outlining the Heritage Protectors' membership, including several prominent local business owners. Communication records showing how they'd coordinated their harassment campaign. And most damning of all, detailed plans for targeting other minority families in the county. "It's bigger than we initially thought," Williams told Jasmine during one visit. She stood watching the SEALs work on the barn frame, clearly impressed by their efficiency. The Heritage Protectors had chapters in 3 counties. Almost 40 members total. They've been operating for 4 years, and you're the first person who managed to gather enough evidence and survive long enough for us to build a case. "What happens to them?" Jasmine asked. "Dale Hutchins is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Armed intimidation, terrorist threats, hate crimes, arson, conspiracy. His attorney is already talking about a plea deal, but we're not interested. We want the maximum sentence to send a message. The others will get varying sentences depending on their level of involvement. But none of them are walking away from this." Williams paused, watching as Peterson directed the crew on roof placement with the precision of someone planning a military operation. "You know, I've been doing this job a long time. I've seen a lot of victims of hate crimes. Most of them move away even after we catch the perpetrators. They can't stay in the place where they were terrorized. But you're different. You're staying. This is my home," Jasmine said simply. "They don't get to take that from me." Williams smiled. "Good. We need more people like you. People who stand their ground and refuse to let hatred win." The barn took shape faster than Jasmine would have believed possible. These men worked with the kind of coordinated efficiency that only came from years of training together. Chen handled electrical. Rodriguez did the plumbing for a new water system they were installing. Troy managed the overall construction while Peterson kept everyone on schedule and properly fed. They'd upgraded everything. The new barn was larger than the old one, with better ventilation, more space, and actual electrical wiring that met current codes. They built separate areas for different animals, added a workshop space, and even included a small office where Jasmine could handle her farm business. "We figured if we're going to do this, we might as well do it right," Troy told her when she protested that they were doing too much. "Besides, this is more fun than our desk jobs. Chen hasn't had this much fun with electrical work since that time in Thailand." "We don't talk about Thailand," Chen called out from where he was installing light fixtures. "We absolutely talk about Thailand," Rodriguez countered. "That's like our third best story." The joking and camaraderie reminded Jasmine of their days in service. These men had faced danger together, celebrated victories together. Were building a barn together, and somehow it felt just as important as any military operation they'd ever undertaken. Local people started stopping by. At first it was just curiosity seekers wanting to see the Navy SEALs everyone was talking about. But then Mrs. Chen from the grocery store showed up with homemade lunch for the whole crew. Old Man Foster brought over some of his wife's famous pie. Other neighbors, people Jasmine had never even met, started dropping off food and drinks for the workers. One afternoon, a young black couple pulled up in their truck. The man looked nervous as he approached Jasmine. "Miss Carter? I'm Kevin, and this is my wife Alicia. We heard about what happened to you. We've been thinking about buying some land around here, but we were worried about fitting in. But seeing you stand up to those people, seeing your friends come help you, it gave us courage. We just wanted to thank you." Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes. This was what it was all about. Not just her farm, but making space for others who wanted to build their own dreams. "You should buy that land," she told them. "And when you do, you let me know. I've got some friends who are excellent barn builders." The couple left with smiles on their faces, and Jasmine turned to find Peterson watching her. "You're changing things here," he said. "You know that, right? This county won't be the same after this." "Good," Jasmine said. It needed changing. The court proceedings started in February. Dale Hutchins and his associates faced multiple federal charges in Atlanta. Jasmine had to testify, describing months of harassment and the final armed confrontation. It was harder than she'd expected, reliving all those fearful moments. But when she looked at the defense table and saw Dale Hutchins in an orange jumpsuit, unable to intimidate her anymore, she felt strong. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Videos, recordings, documents, testimony from Jasmine and from her SEAL team. The defense tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that they'd just been having a property dispute that got out of hand. But the jury didn't buy it. How could they when the evidence was so clear? Dale Hutchins was found guilty on all counts. The judge, an older black woman with steel in her eyes, didn't mince words during sentencing. Mr. Hutchins, you and your associates conducted a campaign of terror against Miss Carter solely because of the color of her skin. You tried to drive her from her property using intimidation, vandalism, and violence. You represent everything that is wrong with the dark corners of our society. This court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison. May you use that time to reflect on what it truly means to be an American. The others received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. Their organization was disbanded. Their assets were seized. And Jasmine filed a civil lawsuit that resulted in a $2.3 million judgment against the group and several of their financial backers. The money would help, certainly. She could rebuild completely, expand her operations, hire employees, but the real victory was knowing that they'd faced justice, that their hatred hadn't won. Back at the farm, things were changing fast. With the barn complete and the insurance money plus the lawsuit settlement, Jasmine started expanding her operation. She hired 3 local workers, including Kevin from the young couple who'd visited. She bought more animals, planted more crops, and started supplying produce to restaurants in 3 surrounding counties. But more than that, she started a program. The Veterans Farm Initiative, she called it. Veterans who wanted to get into farming could come learn on her property. She'd teach them what she'd learned, help them find land, connect them with resources. Commander Peterson, who'd officially retired from his desk job, came on as her farm manager and program director. Within 6 months, 4 veteran families had bought property in the county. 2 were black, 1 was Latino, 1 was a white family from Ohio. All of them were welcomed by a community that was slowly learning that diversity made them stronger, not weaker. The local sheriff who'd ignored Jasmine's complaints resigned under pressure from the FBI investigation. The new sheriff, a woman who'd served in the Army, made it her first priority to meet with Jasmine and apologize for how the department had failed her. "It won't happen again," she promised. "Not on my watch." A year after the confrontation, Jasmine stood in her new barn at a celebration marking the anniversary of its completion. The space was packed with people. Her SEAL team had all returned for the occasion. Local farmers, new and old, filled the space. Kevin and Alicia were there with their new baby. Mrs. Chen had brought enough food to feed everyone twice over. Even Agent Williams had driven down from Atlanta for the celebration. Troy stood up to make a toast. "A year ago, we came down here because our sister needed help. We thought we'd build a barn and make sure some bad people faced justice. We did that. But what happened here was so much bigger. Jasmine didn't just defend her farm. She changed a community. She showed people that courage and determination can overcome hatred. She proved that when good people stand together, they're stronger than any amount of ignorance or fear." He raised his glass. "To Jasmine Carter, veteran, farmer, friend, and the toughest person I know, may your farm prosper. May your crops always grow. And may you never again have to face down armed idiots alone." Everyone laughed and drank to that. Later, as the party wound down and people started heading home, Jasmine walked out to her fields. The sun was setting over her property, painting everything in that golden hour light that photographers loved. Her crops were growing strong. Her animals were healthy and content. Her barn stood solid and beautiful, built by the hands of people who loved her. She thought about the night she'd almost given up, sitting on her porch after the fire, wondering if she should just sell and leave. She was so glad she hadn't. So glad she'd held on long enough for help to arrive. So glad she'd stood her ground. Commander Peterson joined her, looking out over the fields. "You did good, Carter. Really good." "We did good," she corrected. "None of this would have happened without you all." "Maybe," he conceded. "But you're the one who bought this land. You're the one who refused to be driven away. You're the one who turned a personal victory into something that changed lives. We just provided backup." Jasmine smiled. Best backup a person could ask for. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower. Then Peterson said, "You know, I've been thinking. This Veterans Farm Initiative you started, it's got potential to be so much bigger. There are veterans all over the country who need purpose after service, who need connection to the land and to their community. We could expand this, make it a national program. Help veterans across the country find their way to farming." "That's a big dream," Jasmine said. "So was buying this farm," Peterson reminded her. "So was standing up to domestic terrorists." So was changing an entire community's mindset. You're good at big dreams, Carter. Jasmine thought about it, thought about other veterans who felt lost after service, who needed a new mission, thought about rural communities that could benefit from new families, new energy, new diversity, thought about all the good that could come from helping people find their purpose. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Let's make it bigger, Peterson grinned. There's the Carter I know, always ready for the next mission. As darkness fell and stars began appearing in the Georgia sky, Jasmine looked at her farm with fresh eyes. This wasn't just her personal victory anymore. This wasn't just about one woman defending her property. This was about creating pathways for others, about building bridges between veterans and agriculture, between different communities, between the country people thought America was and the country it could become. The heritage protectors had tried to use fear and violence to keep things the way they were. But Jasmine had used courage and community to show a better path forward. And that path was leading to places she'd never imagined when she first bought 50 acres of Georgia farmland. Her phone buzzed. A text from Troy. Documentary people want to interview you about your story. National news too? You up for being famous? Jasmine typed back, not really. But if it helps other veterans find their way to farming, I'm in. Because that was the point of all of this, really. Not fame or recognition or even justice, though all of those things mattered. The point was building something better, creating opportunities that hadn't existed before, making space for people who'd served their country to find new purpose, new community, new homes. The point was showing that hatred could be defeated not with more hatred, but with courage, determination, and the unbreakable bonds of people who refused to let each other stand alone. Jasmine Carter had bought a farm. She'd been terrorized by bigots who thought they could drive her away. She'd stood her ground with a shotgun and a phone, waiting for help to arrive. And when her team showed up, they didn't just save her farm. They helped her create something bigger than any of them had imagined. 1 year later, her barn stood strong. Her crops grew tall. Her community had transformed, and her story had inspired veterans across the country to consider farming, to consider rural life, to consider standing up for what was right no matter how hard it got.